If you ever shopped at a store with electronics back in the early 2000s, you probably remember eMachines, the discount PC company of the era. But today I'm going to tell you the story of one particular eMachines that rocked an entire town. It's all right here on Vintage Geek. Just a quick reminder, if you like what you see today, please consider liking and subscribing. It helps us out a lot. We put a lot of time, work, and resources into each and every video we make here on the channel, and one thing that would help us out tremendously is if you would consider becoming a member. It's just under $20 a year, and you get all of our content ad-free. You can do that at our website at vintagegeek.com. As I've mentioned before on the channel, my non-Vintage Geek life consists of working in the field of radio, and this particular story goes all the way back to the year 2007. I had just started a new job with a company called Northeast Broadcasting, and my whole role with the company was to build 14 brand new radio stations across the state of Wyoming. These were stations that came about because of the FCC auction. Basically what happens is the FCC every once in a while will auction off new construction permits for new stations in various communities around the country. These are to serve an underserved population and for other reasons. Building these radio stations was one of the most interesting things that I've ever done in my career. It was unlike anything else that I had ever gotten into, securing tower sites, putting together equipment lists, getting equipment to these sites, and making everything happen. Wyoming at that time even was still considered the Wild West of the world. The actual terrain and the mountains that we had to go to were pretty incredible. One that I remember in particular was Laramie Peak, where we had to build a transmitter site. In order to get this thing built, we actually had to have all of the equipment hauled up by helicopter, and we were manually moving everything from the helipad back over to the actual tower itself. It was pretty insane. Similarly, we had to build a site one time out of a box truck, where we literally put the entire transmission facility in the back of a box truck, drove it to the top of a hill, and actually connected it to an antenna that was physically strapped to a wooden telephone pole. This was a very crazy time in my career and really rewarding when we got these stations turned on for the very first time. In December of 2007, we had just completed the build-out of a brand new signal outside of Casper, Wyoming. It was on 100.5 FM, and it was actually licensed to the community of Evansville, which was a suburb of Casper itself. I had hired a good friend of mine named Ray to help me with all of the install work at this particular site, which was quite the chore. It was on a fairly inaccessible mountain. Once the antenna was hung, we were able to get the transmitter and everything into a very small building at the site that was about the size of a tough shed, and we got this thing ready to go on air. But we had one big problem. What are we going to put on this station? You see, we were actually against the clock on these builds. We had a certain time that we had to get them built by and a time that we had to have them on the air and get the license applications submitted so that everything would be proper and legal. In order to do that, we had to have some kind of programming. There was no internet access up there at the time, and we did not yet have any kind of studio location in Casper or anywhere that the audio could originate from. So we started thinking about, well, what are we going to do in this scenario? And I remember very distinctly calling the owner at the time and saying, hey, this station is ready to go on the air. What do you want us to put on it? And he simply said, oh, well, you figure it out. You're the one that's there. Just find something that you can put on the air. As I mentioned, I had hired my friend Ray. We were great friends, and one thing that we had in common is that we were very much into rock music. Anything that was current, anything that was heavy, loved it. We noticed listening to stations around the dial that there just wasn't anything in the market that was playing that kind of music. And we both looked at each other at one point and said, we've got to do this. I mean, there's only one chance we might get to just put on the station that we want to put on the radio, and this is it. How are we going to make this happen? We didn't have a huge budget for all these projects, and the transmission equipment was very expensive in itself. We needed a computer for this project, and we needed it fast. We happened to find what we thought was just the right machine in the storage section of our Cheyenne studios. It was an eMachines eTower 800. Now, this machine came out in 2001, and I'm pretty sure it was one of those computers that if you did all the mail-in rebates and all the discounts and everything, you would end up getting the computer for free. It was being used as an office PC, as I recall, because when we first booted it up, it just had some standard Word type software and that type of thing on it. We went ahead and did an install of Windows 2000 just to kind of clean things up, make sure we were starting from something fresh. Ultimately, the computer was pretty old, but it was functional. And then we said, well, how are we going to get something that we can rely on to continually provide audio output and programming, even if things go wrong at the site? We had to make sure that if the power went out, when the power came back on, the computer would come back on and it would just start putting out audio again. We started looking at options, and I actually had found a freeware program that was called Duratore, the French program designed for radio automation. automation. It could basically automate all the time based on some simple categories, and it didn't require any playlists to be created or any additional databases. Between the two of us, we pooled our CD collections and we started putting everything into one big box that we would take up to Casper, Wyoming. We basically camped out at the Parkway Plaza Hotel, which was the big hotel in the town at the time, and we just started working on this project. The two of us would sit there. I would rip in the songs from the CDs of choice, and he would go online and basically look up lyrics of songs, because we wanted to make sure that there were no swear words or anything that could get by, as that would be obviously an FCC violation. I would go into our audio editor and I would insert static over any of the swear words in the songs to edit them out. We also needed a way for us to identify the station, as the FCC requires a legal identification to be done at least once an hour. In order to do that, Ray actually recorded the voiceover for a few legal IDs that I put into an audio editor and spiced up a little bit to make them sound cool.
KTED, Evansville, Casper.
And then we would run those alongside all of the music that we were loading into the system. So we loaded up the eMachines and said, let's give it a shot. We took it all the way up to the transmitter site, we plugged everything into the audio processor, and we just let it rip. Now, back in those days, we didn't even have an email address for the radio station, so we really didn't know what the reaction would be. We had no way of judging the feedback in town, but we let the station play to see what would happen, and we started seeing some things pop up here and there. There were some forums that had to do with off-roading and things like that, and we started seeing some messages pop up from people saying, hey, there's this new station out of Evansville. It must be some kind of pirate station, but they're playing some really cool stuff. You should check it out. And a lot of messages like that started circulating around the internet that we kind of found randomly, which was pretty cool. We also put together a very rudimentary logo for the station with the 100.5 and Casper's Pure Rock. We had a very cheap banner printed. I remember it was very pixelated, so it didn't look very good up close, but from a distance it was all right. And I remember putting a banner like that on the side of one of our vehicles and actually going to a concert at the event center in town just to see if anyone would notice. And people actually did walk by and saw the logo and said, hey, it's KTED. So there was definitely a buzz kind of brewing about the station. But I had no idea how much of an impact the station had actually made until we got some info from our Arbitron rep. Now, Arbitron was the company prior to Nielsen that actually did all of the radio ratings for markets around the country. We got a call from the representative from Arbitron saying, hey, KTED is at one of your radio stations. Our general manager, of course, was on this call, and he said, yeah, that's a new station. We just put it on the air fairly recently. And he said, oh, well, you may want to consider subscribing to the rating service. We both replied, oh, why is that? He said, well, because as of now, you're number 2 in the market.
Casper's Pure Rock, KTED, Evansville, Casper.
We were both blown away by this, and it allowed us to do a lot of things as time went on. The station was able to grow. We did get that studio location eventually, and we did put in a more proper automation system. We hired a local radio veteran to take the reins and take the station to the next level, Rude Dog, who you can still hear every morning on KTED, which is amazing, and he's still a very good friend of mine. In fact, it is because of him that we actually have this eMachines to talk about today. When I called him about this particular project, he said, you know, I think we might actually still have that eMachine sitting somewhere in the studios. And lo and behold, he actually found the machine sitting on the floor and said, that's gotta be the one. He was kind enough to mail it to us so that we could actually have it for the video today and actually get to fire up this machine after so many years. Thank you so much for making that happen. I'm so excited to give this eMachines a try after all this time, and just all the fond memories involved with KTED and the rock station, and all of the rock stations that I've been involved with since that point all have something to do with that original concept and the original launch of KTED in Casper. So without further ado, I'd like to take a look at this particular eMachines and see what still exists on it today. Seeing this machine back on the desk again really brings me back to a different place in my life, which is really cool. It's funny to look at this now because as things age, obviously they change. One of the things that stood out to me immediately is that there's this kind of imprint discolorization of the front has happened, where the sticker was originally. It would have had one of those promotional stickers that gave you all the features and everything that this eMachines had to offer. Also, the original design would have had a kind of stylized cover over the CD-ROM drive. It may have been long gone even when we put this machine in originally. I'm not really sure. The CD-ROM itself is kind of broken. That may have been a casualty in shipping. Not really necessary for our tests today. There's also some labels on the top and a great note from my friend who sent it here saying, hey dude, which is pretty fun, as well as some actual printed notes that shows a a Windows XP key, so I guess this machine must have had XP on it at some point, as well as some of the specs of the machine, which do appear to be kind of original. It's listed on the sticker on the top as a Pentium 3 800 megahertz, but that's not really true. It's actually a Celeron 800 megahertz machine. The original hard drive, I believe, was 20 gigs, which it looks like may still be the case. So really curious to turn this on and see what might still be left of our original KTED experiment. So here goes nothing. I'm gonna fire it up. Got a little bit of noise to it. It looks like it's booting. Got hard drive indication, Windows 2000 Pro. We might be in business here. Not too slow on the boot up either. I would expect a machine of this age to be a little slower going through that initial progress bar on Windows 2000. Windows is starting up. And of course, went through the auto log on. We would have set that up. Audio is working. Wow, this is really taking me back. It kind of looks like everything is still here. I see the logo for Duratori. It's right here at the top. This is amazing. We've got all sorts of different icons here. Winamp, which we probably would have used for testing. We've got Firefox set up, version 2.0. It's going back a few years. IE6, looks like maybe Simplecast. I do remember that I think this machine we may have later used to be a streaming encoder for the station long after it was used at the transmitter site, so that would also make some sense. Let's see what's on the hard drive of this machine. If I go to my computer, there's a KTED folder. I think all the folders are here. We've got unedited music, fixed songs, new rock liners, liners IDs, new music and stunt. I think we used this to actually run a loop of construction sounds while we were building the studio over a weekend to tell people that something new was coming, so that's also very cool. I'm just gonna try it. I just wanna see what happens if I try to load Duratori. Looks like it's loading.
HAD Mills, under construction. Stay tuned for another major renovation to Casper Radio.
Okay, all right, so it looks like this is actually running what would have been one of those kind of loops or construction sounds when we were launching another station at some point. So the way Duratori works is you would basically set up your folders or categories, and you could put your audio files into those categories, and then it would rotate them based on some simple rules that you could set up. You could basically tell it if you wanted it to not play certain artists a certain number of times in a row. It's been so many years, but let me see if I can remember how this works. So rotation, this is what I remember using. You could basically tell it your different elements or content directories, and then you would tell it how you would want them to rotate. Right now, the rotation is stunt, 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 so we actually want to take that away. Let me see if we can find a rotation here. KTED rotation. This might be it, guys. The file doesn't have any integrity. Well, unfortunately, it doesn't look like the original rotation file's intact, but thankfully this program's simple enough that we could probably just make one very quickly ourselves. What we probably would have done is add an ID, and we add music, liner, music, liner, ID, music. That's the basic idea. It would have been more complex than that, of course, but you could basically make the rotations as complicated as you wanted. We've got a basic rotation. It looks like it's set up here. Let's see if this thing will play.
Evansville,
Tell me what I can do here to make everybody happy.
Pure rock and more of it.
Thank God we got that cleared up.
KTED 100.5. Get back.
There you have it. The original KTED, or at least a version of it, still exists on this eMachines computer from 2001. This is pretty incredible. I really did not expect this. Everything is still intact on this machine after all these years. The entire library is still here. You could still theoretically put this thing back on the air. I find it very impressive to think that the eMachines, kind of one of those universally, I don't know if hated, that might be a little bit too far, but they don't exactly have the best reputation out there, but this thing is still kicking. I did want to double check really quick because we mentioned this earlier that the original hard drive on this would have been 20 gigs. It looks like this is actually an 80 gig drive, so we probably replaced that drive before we put this thing into service, which makes sense. We would have needed the space for the music. Everything else, I assume, is the original specifications. It's actually got 260 megs of RAM, so we must have added a couple of RAM sticks to this thing over the years. And it's given the processor information, which I wouldn't be able to tell you all the different variations of Celeron, but I'm assuming that that's still original. Shows the upgraded RAM, still running a Mountain Standard Time. This is a win, being able to use this eMachines computer today. I could not be more happy to have this as part of the collection here at Vintage Geek, something with the story to tell that it does, and a little bit of reminiscence here on the channel. So thank you for joining me today as I went through this journey.
Less talk, more rock. Casper's Pure Rock. KTED 100.5.
By the way, if you want to get a current feel for how the original KTED sounded back in those days, you can tune into our newest station, WABY, or WABY, up in Albany, New York. You can do that at 939waby.com. Definitely check that out. And a reminder, if you like vintage technology, vintage computers, and stories about them, be sure to like and subscribe. It helps us out a lot. As I mentioned, we put a lot of time, work, and energy into every one of our videos, and what helps us the most is if you would consider becoming a member at our website. You can do that at vintagegeek.com, and it's just under $20 a year. All of our content is available there ad-free. Thanks again for joining us. Until next time, I'm Aaron, and this has been Vintage Geek.